Hello everyone, welcome to Positive G channel. Today is 28th March 2016. Thank you for taking time off lunch to join us on today's topic of applying coaching in work conversations. What we hope to do today is to have a look at some of the tough conversations at work and how we can actually better manage the conversation to continue to have positivity at the end of the day. We will look at what is coaching and what is not a coaching conversation style and finish off with applying it to a situation that we've created. The session should end around 50 minutes time. There is a chat box by the side of the tool. You can key in your questions and I'll be happy to stay back and discuss with you after the sessions. Without further ado, let's start. A little bit about me. I'm part of the team at Positive G channel, and I have been actually in IT, in sales and channel management for the last 15 years. Subsequently, I started to develop the interest in human dynamics, and I went into coaching and positive psychology. Today, I'm an ACC with ICF. I'm also a member of IPPA, as well as the Canadian Positive Psychology Association. Without further ado, let's get into the topic today. Just sit down, we need to talk. I think this picture evokes a sense of dread for a lot of us who have had the opportunities to have some tough conversations in our career. So not everything at work can be a smooth and easy conversation, and sometimes we do need to deal with certain thorny issues. And telling your employee that you need to talk sometimes do bring on a sense of dread on both sides. And some of these situations that you might encounter could be performance-related issues. That's a very common example that we see when the employee is not delivering the kind of results that you expect from them, or the kind of results that they're normally accustomed to. There's also about client complaints. On and off, for those of us who are facing the end customers, there's often times where we hear from customers, about things that are not done well or service level that's not up to scratch. The other one that's also quite difficult to deal with is when the employee becomes disengaged and they're starting to show in the behavior at work. Sometimes this could become a little bit more toxic and the person is actually spreading negativity. All of which we have to deal with, on a quite an urgent basis, and in a way that we hope that will bring about positive results. Last but not least, interperson relations. And these interperson relations can be either that of work, but also sometimes personal relationships that the employee are experiencing in terms of tough situations at home spill over to their relationships at work. So what can we hope for in the best outcome when we're handling the tough conversations? These are some of the criteria that I thought might be useful to consider. Awareness. It's important for the employee to understand that there is a challenge with how he's handling a particular situation. Acceptance. To accept certain responsibility for what is happening and actually accepting also that he has contributed to that. Accountability. Now, once the person is aware of his behavior, accepts that he has contributed to it, it becomes easier for him to hold accountability for himself. At the same time, we want to give assurance to the employee that this is not a situation where we are, going to judge the person's performance for the entirety, but specifically to the situation itself. And the next good outcome that we hope to get will be actionability. Now, actionability is important because what we want is not a repeat of the situation, but that the employee actually engages in action that can help to change the situation or to improve the next time a similar situation happens. Last but not least is to have aspiration. Not only is it about correcting the behavior, it is also about encouraging the employee to aspire to a higher standard or to aspire to something more. Now, on the right side of the screen, you will see the typical iceberg that we would see in leadership development. But in this case of a tough conversation, it has a certain purpose. When we have tough conversation, the most common way of doing it for a lot of us is to stay as much on the thinking logical level as much as possible, keeping the emotional factors out of it. But what we find is that This will only touch on the surface meaning. What we don't discover is underneath the surface, which is the deeper meaning that holds for the employee. And this deeper meaning and emotional factors is very often what's key to the employee actually having acceptance and holding themselves accountable for what has happened. So if we proceed on a tough conversation on purely logic and thinking, we might miss out a large part of the conversation. So how can we use a coaching style conversation to support us? How does a coaching conversation actually sound like? The first thing is a non-judging presence. The non-judging presence is key in the sense of having an open space between yourself and the employee, that you're not actually passing judgment on what has happened, right? Allowing an open space to explore. The word presence is also key. It means setting aside time exclusive for that discussion and giving the person 100% attention and the issue 100% attention. Next, deep listening. A lot of times people tend to think about a coaching conversation as if it's about asking powerful questions, when in fact it is about listening more than it is about asking. When you listen, you hear what's being said, you hear what's not being said, you hear what's implied, and you hear also from the emotional and the behavioral response to your discussion. And this is quite key when you're actually having a tough conversation. To the next point, which is discovering the internal drivers of the employee, both in terms of what has actually happened, what were the internal drivers that have caused the bad behavior, and what are the internal drivers that will motivate this employee to make the changes that you need so that you don't have a repeat of the situation. Next is a co-creation. Now, this is actually not as simple as we think it is, because a lot of times we are talking to our direct reports or to someone who may be lower in the hierarchy. And there is always a perception of power imbalance. So this is important to bring in a coaching style conversation by allowing it to be a co-creation, both by the person who's addressing the problem issue as well as the employee that has caused the problem issue. Last but not least, it's about acknowledging progress. A lot of times we do make the mistake of just acknowledging success or celebrating the end outcome. So let's say if we have an example of an issue with a customer complaint, we wait till the customer actually send in a positive compliment or a positive comment before we acknowledge progress. Whereas a good coaching conversation acknowledges the steps that are being taken towards the end goal. And the more you acknowledge the steps forward, the more you encourage the employee to aspire to the better behavior. All right, so just as a way to contrast what's not a coaching conversation, I think a lot of us understand that it's not about telling people what to do. It's not about simply asking questions. This one I have to emphasize a lot, because if you actually ask too many questions, you can actually sound like an interrogation officer. So asking questions is important, but let's not miss the forest for the tree, because asking questions simply won't heal. Deep listening, as we have spoken about earlier, is actually just as important. It is not about giving advice. Now, a lot of times with younger employees, they do tend to ask you for advice. And what happens is that sometimes they don't own the solution that you give them. So helping them to co-create it as a solution is much better in terms of accountability. Setting goals. Sometimes we make it feel like it is another performance indicator that they have to meet, and that puts a lot of pressure on them. On the other hand, what we are actually trying to do is helping them to progress in the coaching conversation. So when we tackle the tough issue, we can help them to identify steps forward instead of reaching the end goal. And if you actually follow the earlier indications of the coaching conversation, avoiding these 4 conversation traps, you will get away from this feeling of dread from your employee about, am I free to go, officer, as if they've just set into an interrogation session. Okay. So now that we've got an indication of some of the guidelines that we can use, let's go into an actual example and exercise so that we can apply what I call an NDICA, or I affectionately call it Know That I Care. Okay. And I took the situation with a customer who's complained about certain rude behavior from an employee. Now, what's unique here is that the employee is actually always been a good contributor. Okay, but recently he has had some run-ins. He has also been rude to you, for example, not greeting you in the lift lobby. And you have been asked to address this issue about the customer. So the first thing first, the non-judging presence. Getting out the factual data points. So this might require you to do some preparation before the actual conversation itself. And the key here is data points. So be very careful about what you hear from people who are interpretations and what are actually the factual points. The second thing, which is also key about non-judging, is setting aside your personal feelings, irrespective of how you feel about the person, irrespective of your past experience. What you're dealing with here is the actual situation at hand. So if you have to actually get your personal emotion out of the way, through some other means prior to the conversation, try to get that out first. And then set aside time to speak without interruptions. And this addresses the point about presence. When you give 100% attention to the person sitting in front of you, that person will feel the respect coming from you and will also invest time and effort in what you're about to discuss. Okay? So I've given you a simple example of how you can start the conversation about saying that it is an open discussion about a certain situation and that you have set aside a certain amount of time for the both of you to actually go through it. Next, the deep listening. Okay, it's very important when dealing with tough situation or with problem behavior to allow the employee to speak about what happened and to do it in such a way that it's about me listening. Okay, it's not about you telling me a version that you're defending. So the way you ask this question becomes important. And the way you respond when the employee speaks, even if you may not agree with certain points or certain interpretation that the employees has put in place, try as much as you can to listen with no interruptions. And then reflect back what you hear in as much of the employee's words as possible. Okay? Clarify only if needed and only when the employee has stopped speaking. Okay? Next, what might have been the reasons that this situation happened would then drive the employee towards exploring what were the internal drivers. What was the reasons for causing him to behave in a certain way? And for finding that out will also help you to find the internal reasons to help the person make the necessary changes. And one question that we don't often ask, and sometimes especially when you're a male or female situation, you tend to avoid the question of feeling. But asking the question about how do you feel about the way the incident played out allows us to tap the 3/4 of that conversation that's below the surface, touching on the deeper meaning and the emotional factors that's associated with the situation. And when you do that, you actually allow people to really tap into their internal motivations. Ask the employee now, if they were to look back, how would they like that to play out differently? Okay. Co-creating. Again, putting the responsibility back onto the employee, but at the same time supporting the employee in the process. What would you like to have happen? And how can we move towards the goal? Okay. Then again, putting the accountability back into the employee, how would you be open to make a difference? And how would you know that you would have made a difference? Now, this last question is also important because it allows the employee to start thinking about how he envisaged the situation would be when he addressed the issue with the client. So this gives you another opportunity to explore. Acknowledging progress, which is the last step. It is important to appreciate and acknowledge that the employee actually took the time and effort to work through the situation. It is also an opportunity here for you to show that you are recognizing his strengths. So, you've always demonstrated, calmness and patience with the customers, and this is an exception, I'm sure. And while working through this problem, I noticed that you've been really creative in coming up with the different solutions that you can have to bring back the customer X. So this allows you to encourage the employee and also help them to aspire to a better, behavior. And the last but not least, closer look with you being part of the partner in the solution process, where you would be open to hearing more of your progress with the customer. This keeps the door open on the tough conversation and also allows the employee to come back to you if they need to along the process of rectifying the situation. Okay, so that's our simple exercise. Hopefully you will be able to apply the coaching framework into some tough conversations back at work. A little bit about us and the Positive Growth Club and the kind of interventions and workshops that we do. The Positive Growth Club, otherwise known as Positive G Club, really works on supporting changes in mindset and habits. And we predicate this on positive psychology and coaching as a framework itself. With individuals and teams, we look at activating positivity. We look at helping people to grow into their best possible self and connecting people with like-minded peers. At the end of the day, it's all about achieving a flourishing life. With companies, we look at working on organic positive culture, which we believe is a much more sustainable framework for not only corporate well-being, but it is great for staff engagement and also for driving staff performance. So if you'd like to find out more, please feel free to check out our website at www.positivegrowth.club. Well, thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or Skype us. And I hope to see you again at the next session on Positive G channel.